Mayor, if you're okay, I'll just jump in if.
Yep, no, go right ahead. Start away.
So we met 2 weeks ago, and we had an initial presentation on the fiscal year 26 budget. We have an updated presentation here. I kind of want to break it into two parts. First, talking about fiscal year 26, because that's the one right in front of us. That's the one that really matters that we have to adopt. Then we can talk about scenarios for the 5-year plan. 100 things will change between now and the 5th year, so you know, it's important and it's a good process for us to do, but is it really going to turn out that way? Probably not. So before we dive deep into the fiscal year 26 budget, I just wanted to reiterate a couple of points. So this first one is the operating revenue and expenditure. So what this is showing is that our revenues in green have always exceeded our expenditures. What this slide doesn't show, though, is our routine capital costs that are not on there. So up until tonight, it would have included a replacement of all our fleet that were in line for that year. But it will also include other ongoing routine capital costs like switching out HVAC or other things like that. We typically spend around $3 million on routine capital stuff each year. Then some years when we build a library, it will be a lot more, but that's not routine, it's just the other things. So if you add on $3 million onto the yellow columns here for ongoing routine capital, fiscal year 26 is the tipping point where we are really at a structural deficit where we are spending more than we're bringing in. One reason why the budget we proposed, we were okay with it, is we know we don't always spend what we have budgeted. So ultimately, we think that fiscal year 26 would still be a sustainable budget. But going forward, that is the concern I have.
Hold on, go back. You said fiscal year 26. Well,
yep, so if you
have a
added
concern?
$3 million onto this yellow, it would put us spending more than what we're actually bringing in.
And why would, I missed it, why would you'd add $3 million?
Yeah, that's the ongoing routine capital expenses. So replacement of vehicles, replacement of building, things like that that are typical. Okay. And the other thing I want to just keep in the back of our minds as we discuss 5-year scenarios, this is what sales tax has been over the last 5 years. So these are fiscal year 20 through 25, what we project for 25. The rest are all actuals. So we received $3 million more, almost $3 million more in sales tax in the last 5 years. That is not going to happen in the next 5 years. So this was, you know, a change in how North Carolina did things and how we got more taxes from online purchases, things like that. So it will not be going up by $1 million or $500,000, and it could potentially be going down if we hit some sort of recession in the next 5 years.
Where,
So have anything to do with the allocation formula, or no?
Yeah, not the actual formula, but the way that you know, sales tax was collected in North Carolina.
where is the U.S. Open reflected here?
So it would be in fiscal year 20, or would it be in 25 because we got it later?
So the sales tax collected from the U.S. Open is in 24. It's accrued into June of 24. So it is within FY 24. However, the USGA receives because they are a non-for-profit, they receive a refund of the sales tax that they have paid. So on all everything that they paid sales tax on for grandstands and golf cart rental, anything else, anything that they may have paid sales tax on to run that U.S. Open, they received a refund from the state in July of 24, which brings down our FY 25 sales tax revenue.
I'm sorry, Danny, you said that we recognized the sales tax revenue from the U.S. Open in fiscal 24?
Yes. Yes, because it was collected by the vendors in FY 24 in June.
But we don't really operate on an accrual basis. We're more closer to a cash basis.
Yes, but in that instance, we accrue it because we know we're going to receive the money within 3 months.
Okay?
Yep. So with that background, maybe we can,
Selective accrual accounting.
Yep, that's why it's modified, and it's because we recognize revenues when they are estimable and available. And available means that you will have them, the cash, within a short enough time frame that you can use it to pay expenditures. And since we'll get it within 3 months, it's soon enough.
I guess the question I'm having is that we've seen, knowing how the sales tax is distributed, we all share in the bounty of the county. No pun intended there. But where there have been developments, we know it visually of Target and so forth, and you see it elsewhere of development of stores and all. What we're not seeing then is a significant increase in sales tax revenue. It's sort of a disconnect in my mind. People keep saying, oh, look, we got all this development's going on, blah, blah, blah. And I would say, well, we all share in that sales tax.
yeah.
And what I'm seeing here is at least not in 24 or, well, we're not through with 25, I guess, right?
Yeah, but Dana has looked at it, so I asked her specifically about, hey, are we seeing anything from Target? And, you can answer that.
I think because it is spread per capita throughout the county, the impact to Pinehurst itself is going to be pretty minimal, and it could be just a matter of the consumer behavior. It may have just shifted someone from going to shop at Walmart to Target, right? It may not be that they're now buying more
I hear you.
because Target is there. They may have just shifted which store they're purchasing from,
there's
so they're
something-
not really paying. It's not gross more in sales tax.
I guess I got to get an economist to answer my thoughts here, because there is something odd about what we talk about as growth in Moore County, which we have, a lot more people, and a lot more stores. So the pie should be growing. And what I think I'm hearing from you, but you're not an economist, is that, well, the pie didn't grow as much as it sort of shifted. Some of the Walmart slice of the pie went over here,
Yeah.
and some of the slice of the pie from Starbucks went to Dunkin' or whatever.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Well,
I mean,
or online purchases too. It's
Right.
yeah. Well, okay, I find that very fascinating. We'll have to
yeah.
explore that more.
And I guess what I'm just saying here is that in the past, sales tax was a huge boon to our budget process. That each year we could count on $500,000 to meet our expenditures that are rising faster than our current revenues are. That will not be the case moving forward, and that's a concern that we should just keep in mind.
And Doug, I would echo as a topic for whenever our strategic review is, as I think I noted last time, looking at operating expenses have been growing faster than operating revenues.
Yeah.
Structurally, how are we going to address that?
Yep. And I think as we talk about scenarios, that'll be something we focus on a little bit tonight, maybe a lot tonight. As we talk about fiscal year 26, Glenn has been waiting through several public hearings and several enterprise discussions as well. So if you're okay with him, we can invite him forward. We had a discussion about the police department LPR system at our last meeting. He's here to answer specific questions about that.
Thank you.
Good evening.
Thanks for sticking with us.
Very welcome. So were there any specific questions you wanted to ask, or do you just want me to give an overview?
Well, I don't have anything at the moment. I think it's best to start with an overview. And
I thought the briefing you sent out was very helpful in understanding sort of the context that this sits in.
So in the purpose of it, so with the stationary ones, we already have LPRs in use in our dash cameras. They're built into the Axon Fleet 3, and we've had some success with getting wanted people, stolen vehicles. The biggest example is that Chilean theft ring that we were able to break up and get extradited back to New York and since deported. But that also requires luck, being in the right place at the right time. With the 10 LPRs that we're looking at going with, that would essentially put a net around the village to let us know when suspect vehicles enter the village and where they go while they're here. So this is kind of a minimum entry point for us with 10. But for example, we had a break-in at the pharmacy the other night. That's near where we would have had, where we planned to put one. And had we had one there, we'd already have a suspect vehicle. And so our detectives are working very hard on that case, and I believe they're going to solve it. But the curve gets drastically cut down when at 2 a.m. we don't have a lot of traffic, and you can kind of identify vehicles. There's also a lot of technology that goes into it where we don't necessarily need a license tag. We can put in makes and models, and it'll give us those and where they're at. So for us, missing persons, wanted people, stolen vehicles, stolen tags, not just from our jurisdiction, but any jurisdiction that enters them into NCIC. So it's not even required that the other jurisdiction has the LPRs. It just helps us identify them when they come through our jurisdiction, because what we want is for people who are doing wrong things to make every effort to avoid Pinehurst at all costs. The network we're also building won't just work with us. We would tie in with Southern Pines, I believe Whispering Pines, the hospital, the county, and Aberdeen. We would share information between the jurisdictions, because we also share suspects between the jurisdictions, especially here in Pinehurst, where the vast majority of people that we arrest for crimes don't actually live here. It's an advantage to us to be able to capture that vehicle data. Now, on the side where people are concerned about privacy, this isn't something where we are putting public readouts of where everyone's vehicles go. The officers don't even have access to that. They only get notifications when a vehicle that has been entered in our system for a law enforcement purpose goes past one of these cameras, and then they're notified that it passed, let's say, a camera at the traffic circle. Part of having more than one or two is, again, trying to eliminate luck. So if someone came in from near Blake Boulevard and they hit the traffic circle and they exit the traffic circle, we can kind of connect the dots of what way they're traveling, and also alert other agencies, especially if they're sharing our information, which all of our agencies work closely together in this jurisdiction. So that would be kind of automatic with us through our memorandums of understanding and mutual aid agreements anyway. And there's some non-law enforcement functions with it as well. It does traffic analytics. So they, if, for example, let's say if we put one on Morganton Road and we were wondering what kind of traffic patterns we were having on Morganton Road, it'll give you, it'll break it down by hour, day, week, month, and how much traffic you're getting on that road. It'll break it down by the types of cars, whether it's SUV, a sedan, pickup truck, et cetera, and the make of the vehicles that are coming through, as well as the states that the tags are connected to. So we can kind of, through that, know if we're having an influx of visitors, or, for example, during the U.S. Open, our cameras would probably capture a lot more tags from out of town than on a normal day. So it has applications beyond just what we're doing to try to find missing persons and wanted people. And for us, the speed of the information getting out to our officers is what we're looking for. Then when it comes to privacy too, the Flock does have a transparency center, so they, and I mentioned that in the memo that I sent to you, as well as we audit it, so we would know what officers were looking at, what tags, when they were looking at them, because there's always the potential for abuse, but we, every officer is trained in our CGEN standards, and it's the same as with their DCI terminals that they're in their car, that they're only allowed to use those for law enforcement purposes. You have to attach case numbers or CAD entries for a specific case before you can even move through the prompt to get to the information that you're looking for.
All right, a couple of questions. These are sort of parochial. They're around Pinehurst. We get, you guys write 1,000 citations a year for the people speeding, the people illegal U-turns and all that. You also, of course, track traffic accidents, whether they be on 5, the Circle, wherever they are. Will this system enable you to, and would you want to, would it be good policing to be able to look at repeat offenders at all? The repeat license plate that has made 4 U-turns at one location, or has been involved in half a dozen traffic accidents. How do you use that, and would you?
So for that, it won't, the information in there won't track, for example, if you get in 5 wrecks a year at the traffic circle, it will not track that. It only tracks, it would track how many times you were in the circle. So, and we wouldn't be looking at your tag in the LPR system for that purpose, unless your tag had some kind of flag on it that alerted us to it, or that you were involved in some other criminal case and we wanted to see where you were traveling to. For example, one of our biggest issues would be property crime. So we can use this technology to do what's called convoy tracking. So for example, if your tag is seen 30 times in the village, and then Mr. Taylor's tag is seen within a minute going the same directions as your tag, then that's probably your lookout car. So we can do it that way. When it comes to the other information, that stuff's just not going to be in there. That information, it's only capturing certain data, which is the tag number, the information associated with the tag, the make and model of the vehicle, and it compares what's in the system, the DMV system, to what it sees. So if it's a false tag on, if you have a pickup truck and you put it on a BMW sedan, it's going to track those kinds of things. But as far as, it's not tracking the activity at the circle, for example. It's not going to alert us that there's been a crash. That's not what it does.
But it will have all the entry and exit information as far as volume of data by time of day, so forth, which we've been asking for how many years now, by leg and so forth. So it's possible to get most of that.
Yeah, so that's where the traffic analytics will come in.
Just volume.
Glenn, it will not track speed, though, on those vehicles.
It will not track speed. It will not capture faces or do any facial recognition.
Just the raw numbers have been very elusive, let me put it that way, over the last 10 years. So.
And how is this shared with our neighboring communities? You mentioned that, and can you describe that a little further?
Sure. So similar to our Axon stuff that we do, the suite that we have where it's in the cloud, essentially this is where that information goes. It goes to Flock Safety's cloud, and it is shared. You give access to other agencies that request it. So matter of fact, I was talking to the Southern Pines chief this morning about sharing their data if we move forward with this. And of course, he's willing and wants our data as well. So it's essentially they just ask for it it comes in through the system via email and you approve it, and then it generates the MOU for that data. And we already have a policy for LPRs, which is part of the accreditation that we're seeking. So we've already got that policy approved and in our policies as well in anticipation.
How do we work with the county sheriff's office on this?
Same way.
Same way.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
So, yeah, and we've, Aberdeen, Chief Chavis and the sheriff and I, we all agree that this is a good technology, and we want to work together. We have a very unique situation here where all the law enforcement agencies work very well together, and we like helping each other out when we can.
But you'll be getting hits on the highway that people just intended to pass through. You'll be getting that hit as soon as they enter our jurisdiction. Is that correct? Correct.
If they've stolen a car in Fayetteville and they're on their way to Anson County and they just happen to come through the traffic circle or wherever else we have them, then we'll get alerted to its location and the direction it's traveling. And the reason, like I said, 10's kind of the minimum. I'd love to have 20. I think Doug's bar graph is holding me back on that. But the way it would work is as soon as they hit one, we're notified, and then as they hit the next one, we know where they're heading, and then we can alert Whispering Pines or the hospital police or Southern Pines, the county, et cetera. So it actually really becomes more of a collaborative effort with all of us.
Who else in our area has these?
Aberdeen is getting them. Southern Pines has them. There's one at every Lowe's Home Improvement in the country. I think they're also working on Walmart now. The county is getting some. Whispering Pines is getting some, and the hospital police are getting some.
Okay, is there a statewide effort at all? I mean, why isn't the SBI basically championing all this?
Yeah, so it's helpful, obviously, because especially for our area, most of our offenders aren't in town. So it's helpful for us to have that vehicle information. And the SBI is kind of the overseeing agency for all of it, because you have to have a clearinghouse somewhere. And they're doing a lot of the permissions for it. So there is a statewide push from law enforcement agencies to,
I guess what the stuff you're talking about sounds great. But in Pinehurst, it's mainly folks coming from out of town causing problems in our towns. Okay, I want to be able to identify that, and it makes sense to me. But it also seems like the state ought to be kind of managing all this as to how many do you need in Moore County versus how many do you need in Lee County versus how many you need in Raleigh versus how many you need in Charlotte, that kind of stuff, and kind of pushing this and championing the whole thing. And what I'm hearing on there is that, yeah, there's some sort of loose organization, but it's not really pushed hard.
right, the organization just is more about the permissions to use the technology and where you can put them, for example, state right-of-ways. I don't think the state is really in the mood to purchase several thousand LPRs to deploy them throughout the state for local law enforcement issues. They're kind of engaging in some federalism and pushing it to the lowest possible level.
Okay. If we were to get these, I'm assuming there's some sort of leasing contract with it?
Yeah, we can do it year by year because it's entirely possible that we do it and it's not a fit. And so we don't want to be stuck in a 10-year contract for something we're not actually using. So we would do 1 year.
And the 1-year contract is how much?
About $30,000.
About 30,000?
How do you determine if it's not a fit?
If you don't get any hits, if you don't solve any cases, if it's not been a help, if the help's only been nominal, I don't think that would happen just based on the success we've had with the mobile LPRs that are built into our dash cameras.
That goes into the next question I had on here is how do we assess success versus not success? What metrics are we going to use?
Making arrests, closing cases, stopping bad guys. I don't know, have a specific number for you right now, but if lack of success would be 0 hits, 0 cases solved, 0 value in helping us solve any cases.
I would ask, and I'm not saying I'm not going to support this, but I would ask that we have a more structured approach in this, where we're establishing some metrics we're going to look at and say this would be objectively positive success or moderate success or whatever, because we're talking about spending $30,000, and when I asked the question about what is this thing, one of the big questions I had, is it going to be worth $30,000 to this village to have it? And if you're telling me we're saving detective time, we're decreasing crime rates, we're catching criminals faster, if there's a theft and we're nailing them quicker and stuff like that, even though you don't necessarily put a price tag on that, that is of value, and I could see success on there. But I want us to make sure that we're structured and looking at this, not just like, hey, you got something new, the new shiny button, and let's see what it does for us.
That's the point of us engaging on a yearly contract is that we don't just want new technology because it exists. We want it to help us. And the example I gave earlier about the pharmacy break-in, where it would have cut at least 72 hours probably out of this investigation already.
Okay, fair enough. I still go back to the point of it's important to set up metrics that you're going to be looking at before you have the purchase. If I conduct a study in medicine, before I get a grant to do it, I have to say these are the parameters we're looking at. And this is what we determine as being success or not success, but also being open-minded to the data that says, you know, I didn't even think about that, but wow, that really made an impact here. And that's another reasonable approach to it, in my opinion.
Yeah, and we can put together an annual report as we go just to make sure everyone's comfortable with the results that we're getting.
Okay, that's a good thought. With your annual report, you'd have a separate page on LPR.
Yeah.
And so right now, in your professional opinion, if we spend $30,000 on this next year, do you think it's going to return $30,000 worth of value to this village?
I think so. I mean, I wouldn't, I mean, we don't, and you can look through our budget, we don't tend to engage in things that we think will end up being frivolous. And so in looking at this technology, and it's kind of established now, it's not something that's very new anymore. It's existed for the last several years in a lot of different places. I think it'll have returns for us. A prime example of a technology that is great that I don't think we need a shot spotter. You know, we don't have a lot of gunshot calls or gang violence or any, in the village, which is a wonderful thing, so we don't necessarily need ShotSpotter. It would be a very cool thing to have, but it would sit dormant, and I don't think this will.
Well, how does ShotSpotter work? I don't know what that one is.
It uses sound to triangulate
Oh, it's a
gunshots and send you to where they are. There's
And
several
we counter
cities.
the-
in
We
the
counter
state.
the artillery rounds going back in there, so. Okay, bottom line, Chief, you have an excellent reputation here in Pinehurst. I trust you. And you've convinced me that I will support this and however the vote goes in there. But I would ask that we have a reassessment on this yearly, specifically next year. Let's look at this. And I would expect you to be able to come back to the council and say, you know something, this has really been great, or know something, this has been about what we expected, maybe a little less, or no, there's something we need to get rid of. Okay?
If I'm wrong, I'll always say it, and there's been things we've cut that we've tried to right size and that we just ended up not needing and that we've eliminated from the police department. So we're very nimble when it comes to that, and that's why we don't engage in the long-term contracts for things like that.
You're a well-known professional in my eyes, and I will trust your opinion. We'll go with
Thank
it.
We made him cut the $30,000 of frivolous stuff from his budget to get this.
No, you're putting him into enterprise cars instead of his own cruiser, so.
Exactly. And I don't want to equate having an LPR as the equivalent of a police officer by any means, but it would be incredibly expensive to have, that many officers out looking for things all the time. So in a way, I think this is the future of police work and using technology to make our police officers more efficient in the time they're here.
Also on the review, just remember that at the end of the year, so in January, we get our annual report. It'll only have about 5 to 6 months of data in it. So at the mid-year report in 26, you'll get a full year of the data on what we've done with it.
Fair enough. Any other questions for the chief?
It will.
Hear any of that?
I got it.
Thank you. Anyway, so I guess my point was, how will you be able to gauge something like that? Where does that even come from? How do we know that it deters?
Sure. You can't really quantify it. That would be the same as saying that crime went down and trying to quantify that against neighborhood patrols. Saying that deterred it when we hope it did, but we don't know it did because it didn't happen, So we're not going to highly advertise where they're at. So we want to deter through enforcement, not through letting people plan where we have them.
Okay.
Unless you want to spend $60,000 and give me about 20 of them, then we can put them everywhere.
Not at this point.
We'll see how the annual report goes.
Are they inconspicuous or
Yeah.
conspicuous?
Yeah, I mean, you'll notice it when you ride, but
You will.
depending on where they're at, because they'll have a solar panel on them. They're not that big of a solar panel, and they'll be on a pole that maybe wasn't there last week. But like for example, if you go to Lowe's, you've probably never noticed that you drove by one.
Jeff, I think you're right. We ought to try to establish some metrics to evaluate this against. It may be hard to quantify it in dollars and cents. Are we getting $30,000 worth of, I don't know, crimes that didn't occur or that got solved helping another jurisdiction? But the fact that we can't come up with it here doesn't mean we shouldn't try to come up with it, because that's the way we'll measure it a year from now. I think that's right.
Jack, did you have something? Okay. We need anything more from the chief? Doug?
I don't.
You don't? Okay. Thank you.
Thank
Thanks,
you.
everybody.
Okay.
Okay, so that was one topic on the FY26 budget that came up. Another one that was talked about is walkways, and I had in the budget a walkway along Magnolia from the police station to the corner of Rattlesnake and then all the way up Rattlesnake. And then I reached out to Duke Energy to talk about how much would it be to underground utilities along Rattlesnake, and the number was at least $1 million. So the mayor asked us to remove the portion of Rattlesnake from that dollar amount. So if we wanted to only do it on Magnolia, it's $95,000. I'm okay with that budget change, and I think that is built into some of these scenarios that we have that we'll go over later today. also discussed last time was the Salt and Brine building and the water tank removal. Those things could be taken out of the budget, and as we get to them, whether in fiscal year 26 or maybe even the year after, we could just come back to council at that point and ask for an appropriation from fund balance to purchase or to do that project.
And that number was, I think, 100 grand? What was that?
So the Salt and Brine building was 100 grand, and the water tank removal was 200 grand.
Yeah. Let's just separate them for a moment for discussion purposes. The water tank issue has some connectivity to this, what do we do with that land and so forth. And I gather you are discussing with some folks about what possibilities there are. The Salt and Brine thing, I think, is sort of less of an urgent matter, and that it doesn't have the potential other side of that equation of utilizing that property as the water tank does.
Yeah, certainly that. The urgency on the Salt and Brine storage facility is the building that's currently in, it's destroying that building. And so if you store it outside, it'll just wash away in the rainstorm.
Sure, sure.
That needs to be a solution we look at. I think that it might take longer than fiscal year 26 to find the right solution, purchase it, go through the whole process. That's likely.
So we could move it a year.
So what I would say is we move forward on it on this best speed we can, and we can come back to council and ask for a fund balance appropriation for that when we get to that point. Because that's what we'll be budgeting it with in the budget anyway.
So leave it in 26 is what you're saying, or not move it to 27?
I am saying it would be easy to remove it out and pay for it later from fund balance, because that's what we're using.
You're saying taking out of 26 and utilize fund balance in 26 if we need to?
If we need to.
Okay, that's fine.
So is the water tank removal the same as infrastructure improvements in Village Place? Because I'm a little confused as to what that means.
So in the budget presentation, we had it all in one line, but that was more to just save room. So this $200,000 that we had originally penciled in for 2026 was literally the removal of those water tanks.
So it is the same as infrastructure improvements in Village Place? Because there's a line item, depending on which document you look at, that says infrastructure improvements in Village Place, and then there's another line item in a different document that says removal of the water tank, and they're both $200,000.
Yes.
Yes, because I think in the 5-year forecast, it talks about Village Place. It has something to do with Village Place development, because there's also an estimated amount of $200,000 in 2030 that would be for
Actual physical infrastructure.
Okay, well.
Oh, no, that was
No,
for
it's
removing
for-
the EMS buildings.
the EMS buildings, thank you, yeah. So there's two separate,
What is the answer to my question?
they are the same thing.
They are the same
Yes.
thing. There you go. Now, I understand that. The question of the sidewalks, are you implying that the plan will only have a sidewalk down Magnolia to Rattlesnake and not continue up and down Rattlesnake? Is that the,
That is what we are here to discuss, but
Okay.
yeah.
we're here to discuss it. Good.
I feel like we've started in the middle here somewhere.
Yeah, it started in the
Maybe
middle.
because we started and then we had the chief come forward and
Yeah, I mean, we have a presentation. A lot of it is what we did last meeting. I didn't want to belabor that, and we can go through it again. What I am hoping for to come out of this discussion is, this is what we want to spend on in fiscal year 26. And then we also need to have the discussion on what does the next 5 years look like. With that, do you have questions on what fiscal year 26 will look like?
Yeah, and the items that we've discussed just now, the LPR discussion with Chief Webb, and then the sidewalks on Magnolia and Rattlesnake, and the salt brine storage building, water tank removal, those were items from the preview presentation last week when we discussed that we're noted as ones we wanted to follow up on and discuss further. So that's why we were highlighting those first, and because they impact the FY26 budget.
Right, no, I would say from my standpoint, X the capital items, what I will call the operating budget, including recurring things like sidewalk replacement that we do every year, I did not have any particular agita over the proposal.
There was one other thing on there that we're spending, I guess it's budgeted now for 45,000 for next year on the software, tracking the STRs. And, from my understanding here, talking to, Alex also, looks like we identified 20, he had said at least half of those were already identified. So technically I found about 10 of them in a conservative aspect. For $40,000, that's 4,000 per. And, it's 2,000 if you want to say, just reinforced 10 other ones. But point of diminishing returns. Is it going to help us out next year in this? And should we be budgeting 45,000 for that? And I'll tell you that I don't see that as a point on there. So I would recommend that we take that off our budget.
I don't think we have enough data to do that at this point. We've hardly begun it. Am I right?
We got it with 40,000. It's given us a turn back, but
I mean,
I put the
we
recommendation to
really,
be removed.
yeah, we really don't have enough data. I mean, let's acquire a year's worth of data at least, and then make a determination. The good news is we can terminate it.
So we have two opposing opinions there.
Okay.
Is there a will of the council?
Well, as I perceive it, we've started down the road to actually try to gather data and enforce an ordinance. We've sort of started down that road, and you're suggesting that we stop going down that road. That's what it implies to me.
For next year's budget, I think we've gotten the information.
Just started this program live around the 1st of April and sent out a series of letters. Do we have the results of the letters that we have sent out from the initial mailing? Have we mailed out all the letters that we were going to mail out? Do we have all the information that we have been looking for? I haven't seen a report come across that says it is not working or working. We don't even have, what's today? We don't even have 30 days worth of data.
I'll assume your questions are rhetorical on that. They're not expecting an answer from Doug.
Oh.
I think I don't think there are rhetorical questions.
Okay.
But we may not have the answers back yet.
Yeah, so since we last met, we have sent out the initial letter to inform people that, we're looking at this and these are the rules if you're operating an STR. And that went out to everyone that has an advertised STR.
And there are.
I didn't think that the intention was a one-shot deal. I thought the intention was that we were going to try over time to enforce this ordinance, and our experience and the software experience, as well as how well the reaction is from the participants on the other side of the agenda here.
Well, I'm not sure how much more it's going to help us. It's already $4,000 per offender that we're looking at that we didn't already know about. $2,000 per offender if you want to say it's the ones that we did know about including. Okay.
I just think we ought to let one more year to actually see some bona fide metrics that we can say, hey, why don't we end this, or maybe we should continue it or enhance it. So I don't know. What's the consensus? Should we continue it for another year?
I believe we need at least a year and a half experience in this, and it'll come up in next year's budget process, and it's very possible in next year's budget process.
That's true. Yeah, that's true. It's an annual thing. We'll get an annual bite at the apple. Okay.
So I believe we entered into the contract in November. So before we renew the contract, I think it would be appropriate to have a discussion like, hey, how's it working? Are we satisfied with it?
Agreed.
Yeah.
Makes sense.
So we could do that in October.
So we'll have that in but the money we'll put in our 26 budget.
Well, if that's what the council wants me to do, I will leave the money in there in the 26 budget, and we can have her follow up before we enter into next year's contract.
Yeah, I think that's practical. Do we?
We make adjustments all the time, plus and minus, and maybe that will be one. We'll see.
Okay, I guess the outstanding issue for me is the walkways on Rattlesnake. Is that something we want to leave in the budget, or is that something you want to, hold off? If we're going to wait until we underground utilities on Rattlesnake before we put a walkway in, I think we'll be waiting a very long time for
Long
that.
time.
Well, I don't want to wait till then, but I do think we don't even have the library ready yet. And I think it makes sense to have a walkway on Magnolia. I think that whole property there on Rattlesnake, where we're in the midst of exchanging that 1 acre we have with the county of Moore for them to put in their emergency service thing, and there's possibilities with other pieces of that property. I'd be hesitant to go around the corner all the way right now. I am not hesitant at all to do it all the way up Magnolia. And then let's take a look at it in another year or so, and we can add there, down Rattlesnake. Because I think Rattlesnake Trail, as it's known, is such a narrow pathway, a road. I'm trying to save a little money there simply because I just don't think we're ready for it.
Well, it is a narrow pathway, or it is a narrow road. Therefore, that sort of begs the question, why don't we have a sidewalk on this heavily traveled, very important throughway or entry into the village? And I would recommend that we actually create a sidewalk on Rattlesnake from Magnolia all the way to McCaskill.
What was the delta between only going
So I have
200,000?
a little less. I had budgeted $350,000 for both Magnolia and Rattlesnake, and just for Magnolia, I have 95,000. If I had to guess, that 350 might be a little on the low side, but
It's just a logical place. We're talking about enhancing Village Place, enhancing being able to walk to the village, et cetera. And to not have a sidewalk on that reasonably important gateway into the village, I think is a mistake. I think it's time to rectify that.
I will add that year over year, the highest priority is capital funding for walkways. And while we have our annual allotment that is used to address that, we haven't addressed it significantly in the last 10 years.
I don't remember us ever discussing adding a sidewalk on Rattlesnake Trail, as opposed to all the other places where we have plotted out, where we are planning to do sidewalks. We're actually constructing some now in number 6.
Yeah.
And I forget the sequence of what's following that, but I never recall us putting any that way.
Yeah, and that rose on the priority list because the library is being built, and we wanted a connection from downtown
get
to
that.
that. But
That's why I get the library connection.
I will say from my perspective, I don't have a strong view one way or the other. I have lots of other issues relative to the 5-year capital budget. I hear Jack's point. I think it's a reasonable one.
I agree with you, John. I think that it's not necessarily the highest priority for me, but I can see that, and I would support that.
Provides access to very important facilities we have, which will be the library, of course, and also the current community center.
Concur.
okay, with that, I'll take away that we leave that in the fiscal year 26 budget.
Okay.
All right, I think that answers all of my questions for fiscal year 26.
Well, I've got one item.
Sure.
I'd like us to consider at fiscal year 26 that we reduce our property tax rate by half a penny there. It's at 0.225 now. I think we should give it serious thought with the amount of money we have in our reserve fund. I think it's at 20 million or something, that we reduce it by that half penny. we'll still have plenty in the reserve fund. And based on the numbers that we have here, we will have no problem under any scenario of maintaining both our ending general fund balance of 20 million and an estimated operating margin at 80 cents. So we're quite flush for 26. And so I would like us to seriously think about that little drop. We've successfully reduced our tax rate each of the last 3 years. But, and this is not a large amount, it's a very tiny amount.
That's a noble gesture on your part, but I think that's unwise. I think we're better off maintaining the tax rate where it is. I think there's a significant number of unknowns in the future relative to how much we're going to spend on various projects. And I don't think it's plan to have a little less money. I think normally I'm a hawk on trying to keep the tax rates as low as possible, but in this case, I think there's enough unknowns in the future of our economy and the projects that we're wise to just keep the rate as it exists today.
I will mention that part of the discussion at the county commissioners' work session last Monday was a proposal, or I don't say, it was proposed by one of the commissioners that they reduce the county rate by 1.50 cents. At a later portion of the meeting, the alleged top priority for this same person was figuring out where they have to get water and sewer to accommodate the expected growth in the county.
And where they're going to build these schools, too.
Well, they didn't say that. I believe that's true, but that's not what this person said. He said where to get water. And that's a big ticket item. And it's wrapped up in their redo of the land use study and a whole bunch of issues. But our current 5-year projections also at the moment assume zero inflation in the ad valorem tax base when it comes up again in 2 more years.
Yeah.
That
maybe
certainly is very conservative, and
Yeah.
good to be conservative. I think we will be surprised. I don't think it'll be zero. I don't know how big it'll be. It'll be 50%.
And certainly we don't expect it to be zero. It's a variable that is unknown, and the levy is going to remain the same whether or not that number goes up 20% or 10%. So, but maybe we can discuss the whole tax rate situation as we walk through all these different scenarios. So
I'm fine with that.
Let's do that. So
I made my point. I just feel we have lots of money, and I always feel it's a little better, even if it's a small percent, just a tiny amount in our residents' pockets than rather in our government coffers. And since we're rather flush, we can rediscuss that. I'm open for later discussion.
I tried to look at these things pretty carefully. I may be mistaken, but as you address the scenarios, it seemed like there were certain items, significant capital items, that had either appeared or disappeared without prior discussion. And I was wondering, an example, the pumper truck replacement.
yeah, so
I'm just curious what the rationale was behind adding or subtracting these things at this particular moment. It doesn't really affect the next year budget.
Yep. So those replacement items actually were not removed. They are still in the 5-year plan. What we didn't do is include all replacement items on the list that was presented to you last time. So anything that was replacement. So every year we replace a garbage truck, and sometimes we replace a pumper truck. All replacement items are still built into the budget, but they weren't listed as specific new capital items in those fiscal years.
Okay, thank you.
So is that somewhere else in another year? I'm trying to, where does the $800,000 show, I guess is where I'm trying to figure out.
There's $1 million in FY28 for the pumper truck replacement.
Okay.
So let me walk through these scenarios, and they will bring up a lot of discussion, I'm sure, but maybe this will help give us some structure to the conversation. Okay, so currently as proposed, no change in fiscal year 26 and 27. in '28, we have a 1 cent increase, and that is to adjust for additional staffing for the library and for just that. And then no change in '29, and then in 2030, we had an additional penny increase to fund debt service for the third fire facility.
It's fiscal '28 where any revaluation will occur, correct?
Correct.
That's-
Be done in calendar
That's-
'27 and reflected in fiscal '28.
In fiscal '28's tax revenues, correct?
Yep.
Yeah.
Right, and I don't want to confuse this, and maybe Dana's going to yell at me because I'm showing this, but if we assumed a 10% increase in valuation, who knows what it might be? Even increasing the levy by that penny amount, then we would actually have a tax rate that is dropping to 21.5. If we assumed only a 5% increase in valuation, we'd be staying basically at the same tax rate. So yes, '28 will be a reval year. It'll change the valuations, which will change the amount of our tax rate. But the levy is what we have to care about, how much money is actually being brought in.
Let me just be consistent in what I've been in the past on that. I do not think it is fiscally wise for us to tell our residents that in 3 years, we're definitely going to raise your taxes. There are too many capital projects, too many variables bouncing around out there for us to tell them we are predisposed that we are going to actually raise your taxes on the, and literally in the same year that your house is going to be reevaluated. Maybe 10%, maybe 5%, maybe 25% more. And then we're going to be back and forth and explaining that all to them. That's one of my reasons to keep, every year we get to reassess the tax rate.
Sure.
Every single year. And to say, oh, in 3 years we're going to raise your taxes. Well, I mean, the question I'm getting at, well, yeah, what are you thinking? What's on your mind 3 years from now? What don't we know about?
Yeah.
And I just don't think that's the right way to approach the fiscal management of it. So,
Yeah, what we're trying to say is forecasting revenues, forecasting expenditures, in order to maintain what we have forecasted, we'll need additional tax revenue. If we want to show that differently based on an assumption for valuation changes, we can. That would be a change in practice, but it's an
Well,
option.
you could certainly, based on what you just showed us, if you put in an evaluation number, you can leave the tax rate flat. That's what your number showed right there, and you can actually reduce it. I think one of your numbers was 0.214.
Yep.
You're right. I mean, depending upon what the valuation rate assumption is, we can look to see, it's a little bit of smoke and mirrors here.
Yes.
Yes.
That's my opinion, is
Which is why
can
in part
decrease, we could, depending on the revaluation and what tax rate we choose to adopt, we could effectively increase people's tax bill with a lower rate. You can say you lowered the tax rate, but their tax bill has gone up.
Absolutely.
That happened this.
happened last
Exactly, exactly. And so I feel like it may be deceptive to play with making a shot-in-the-dark guess at what the revaluation change may be and the impact that could have on the tax rate versus just showing, and this, none of it is committing anyone to increase the tax rate in 3 years.
it's signaling.
But it is a projection. It's to say this might be what is required to fund this in the future if that's the plan we stick to.
Exactly. There are no guesses here, once again. There's only projections based upon the best knowledge we have.
So just an observation. Yesterday at the NAC meeting, when you gave your presentation, you gave them a schedule of the tax rates of municipalities in Moore County. And the closest one to us was Southern Pines at 2.9. And we're talking about 2.45 5 years out. And the comment that came from the comments that came from the participants there, from the representatives, was thank you for keeping our tax rate low. Some of the tax rates in Moore County go up to 7 cents. So, I mean, I think this is for planning purposes, if we're going to have a 5-year forecast, we have to have a 5-year forecast that is meaningful, knowing that we can change it along the way. But we're still at a very low.
The need to have a certain tax rate or forecast one in the future is totally based on the need or the desire of how much you are going to spend as a village. And we have a bunch of capital projects here that we really need to evaluate. And as that may change the, not only could the Moore County reevaluation of our property rate change things, but the amount of projects, for lack of a better phrase, that we include in these budgets will have an impact.
Yeah,
And so
yeah, I don't want to cut off the discussion, but I think it would be helpful if we go through the presentation and then we're all talking about the same thing.
And
What I will say is the concern is not capital. The concern is ongoing operational expenses going into the future.
And I think having that discussion first is more important. That's number one. And with specific reference to the 2030 going up a penny, predicated on building Fire Station 3 where we have an ongoing Birdie,
Yeah,
that could go away. So I would be happy to pull that one out.
yeah.
And when the Birdie comes through, then we'll see what it says.
Yep. So walking through this scenario, so scenario A, the one we talked about, the one that was proposed originally in the budget, the metrics that we measure whether or not this is a good 5-year plan are if the total baseline, total percent of the budget right here is 30% or above. That's what we want our fund balance to be of the original budget amount. The other portion that, in my opinion, is actually more important is the estimated operating margin. So this, we want to have about 90%, give or take a little bit, because we want to have additional money for capital projects that we know we have every single year. So this budget does an okay job. We're totally fine on the fund balance amount. The estimated operating margin gets a little tight in 29 and 30, but 29 and 30 is pretty far away, so I'm okay with it.
Look, can you go back to that?
Yep.
Because I'm looking at the number of estimated operating margin here says 88 cents, 0.88.
Yep.
The one I have in the scenario A baseline says 0.80.
where?
Oh, no, I see. Okay, it's a different year. Never mind. I'm looking at two different documents. I'm fine.
Okay, yeah, that's in the FY '25.
Yeah, that was
estimate,
FY '25, so you, in the earlier one. Go ahead.
Okay, so we're going to move on to scenario B, which is a half-cent reduction. So that here, because it's ongoing expenses, it doesn't touch our fund balance amount. So this stays the same. What happens here is that, next year we are already kind of hitting the red zone where our operating expenses, ongoing expenses, are exceeding our operating revenues. So that's how that one works out.
And one thing, I'm sorry, I realized after the fact that I should have included a row with the tax rate in each year for these slides, but on the handout portion.
It's in your handout.
You can
It's in the
see, yeah,
scenario.
so in this scenario, we reduced the tax rate to 22 cents in FY '26, and then there's assumptions that we increase it in subsequent years to kind of make up for it above and beyond what's in the baseline scenario. So that is why the fund balance and estimated operating margin do not change significantly.
So to meet the half a cent reduction in '26, we had to, in fiscal year '28, raise it to 1.5, and in fiscal year '29, increase it another half. And then in fiscal 2030, we have another 1 cent increase because we had already talked about that.
Yes, but again, that's with every capital project in here. This is fully loaded, for lack of a better phrase.
Sure, except that capital projects are not going to change the estimated operating margin at all.
No?
Yeah.
It will, if you go down across to FY '30, if you go to the third fire facility, that is definitely impacting your operating margin because you've got 12 more FTEs, and you've spent $10 million.
Yep. So
That's been draining off the general fund balance.
But that's the operating portion,
Right.
the operating impact of the capital project.
One thing,
yes.
Dana, I wanted to comment on these, and I appreciate these scenario breakouts.
So, Pat, you mentioned the taking out the fire stuff. So that's scenario C. So let's talk about that.
Okay.
So scenario C is removing the fire facility, all 12 employees that were associated with that, although that didn't actually change the operating budget at all, because we were assuming that they were going to be grant funded. And it removes the ladder truck that was planned in, I forget, fiscal year 27, so that it would be ready when the station opened in fiscal year 30. So if we remove those items, then we have quite a bit extra in the fund balance because that $2.5 million fire truck is no longer coming out. So plenty of room on the fund balance.
And let me ask you a question, Dana. On your FY30, I'm going off this sheet, okay, where you have you have just a little more detail than what you have on the screen.
Yep.
In the FY30 column, where you have property tax revenue and then intergovernmental revenues, and I understand now since you showed us the sales tax what that looks like, but I notice there and in a few other places the numbers are in red ink.
Oh,
Now,
yes.
when I see red ink, I think we're underwater or something. I know that's not the case, but what is the rationale behind the red ink there?
Yes, so the items in red on these sheets
Yes.
are the numbers that have changed as a result of that scenario, of what was added or removed or
Baseline?
from the baseline, yes. So the,
Changed or worsened?
just changed.
Okay.
Just
Any-
changed.
Even positive changes would still be red.
Correct, it just indicates that it's a number that has changed as a result of that scenario compared to the baseline.
Okay. So this scenario C leaves us with a
Yeah,
total budget with our at the end of it, 42.5% in our ending fund balance, and we're 0.95, but that's 4 years away. 5
yeah.
years away.
This is a healthy scenario.
Yep,
And this does include a 1 cent increase in 28 for the library additional employees that will be coming on in fiscal year 28. Again, that will be changed with the reval, so the actual penny amount will be different.
Okay.
Okay, so scenario D is remove the fire stuff as well as the items, I will just show it to you. Removing these items from fiscal year 26 budget.
yeah, it's just removing those.
Oh, sorry.
Yeah.
Yep.
The next one's the combination, yeah.
That's scenario D.
So it's removing capital items basically from fiscal year 26. So we, again, fund balance is healthy, better than the baseline, and it doesn't change much on the estimated operating margin.
Hold on a second. Oh, I see. It's 0.96 on FY30. Okay, thank you.
Right. And then scenario E is C and D combined. So removing the capital items from scenario D that we just talked about and removing all the fire stuff.
And that's sort of similar to scenario, somewhat similar to
It's-
C.
Yes, it's very similar to C because we're only a couple $100,000 in capital items in
Yeah.
fiscal year 26. It doesn't make a large difference overall budget.
And let me just see, what's the, and the FY30 is, it's just the operating margin that's a little off, but as we say, by the time you get there, it's always healthy, so to speak. But okay, thank you, I get that.
And then scenario F, which the mayor sent an email requesting that we look at this item. Let me just make sure that I cover exactly what is, so it is reducing the tax rate to 22 cents in all years, removing the ladder truck, West Pinehurst Park, and the fire facility, dropping the walkways on Rattlesnake Trail, add 250,000 for a rescue facility design in fiscal year 28, move the pumper truck replacement from 28 to 27, and reduce from 1 million to 800,000, and move the salt and brine building from 26 to 27.
Let me, since I up with this, the 250 that I'm putting in there is on the assumption that we may want some emergency type station as opposed to a full-fledged fire facility, and that's just to design it. That's not
Yep.
to build it. And I was making, since the assumption for the full fire facility was 400,000, I just put 250 as a plug. I have no point of reference as to why it should be that.
Sure.
The pumper truck replacement, and I guess I was under the impression that, one, we're replacing something that must be wearing down, or we need to replace it, which strikes me as a more urgent need than something else. If we've got something we rely on, and boy, it's not going to go too much longer, we ought to replace the thing. But, so that's why I plugged it back in there. Now, I've heard your comments and others, so again, it was a thought I had. It may be the wrong thought. And then the salt and storage facility we already discussed. So, but I see in this scenario, our GF balance is healthy, 33.9% in FY30, but our operating margin gets problematic, up to 0.98. So, something to discuss, consider, weigh. Some combination of all these will probably end up being our budget.
So
Ask about West Pinehurst Park. Is $740-some thousand, is that turf or what?
no, so what we did was we had $743,000 already budgeted in the 5-year plan, or penciled in the 5-year plan, to redo the small Camden Park baseball field there and make that turf.
The only thing we haven't done so far.
Right.
Right.
But after discussing with staff, we felt that rather than spending money on that project, we would think it's a better value for the community to provide a new park amenities at West Pinehurst Park. So $743,000 isn't going to be a lot, but maybe it's enough to put in some bathrooms and some potential irrigation out there, so it could be a field. The actual design or determination of what actually we do out there hasn't been made, but we're going to move that money to something else. So looking back at the scenarios, so I would say my first recommendation is the one that we originally proposed. I think that makes the most sense. If we wanted to change the scenario to remove the fire things, with the known that we are still looking at the fire facility and that will change the 5-year outlook, I think that is something we can explore and something that I'd be willing to get behind.
That's basically scenario C.
Yep.
Mm-hmm.
This says a couple things to me, and I understand that I'm talking my own book here. A lot of people do. This reinforces to me not only the importance of looking at growth and operating expenses versus revenues, but also our capital budgeting process as we're waiting. I think it is conceivable that in the next year, we could make some significant changes in what we think is the capital budget, the 5-year capital budget. And those are going to be, that's going to be much more, I mean, look, whatever we could adopt any 5-year plan we want. We're not committed to anything until we actually start funding a project. And when we commit to the library, we know it's going to be multiple years to build or across multiple fiscal years. But once we start, we're in. Right now, we're not in any of these things. I look at from Dana's presentation, looking at 2024 community survey priorities. Third fire station, additional parks and additional athletic fields, finish 1, 2, 3 at the bottom in every one. Fiscal 26 strategic operating plan, they're in the same place. So I can easily take the 743,000 and say, we just forget about that altogether. That's not going to move the numbers dramatically relative to the aggregate of all of our capital commitments. But I think that's going to be much more important food for thought a little later this year. In terms of giving Dana and all of staff, Doug, direction on how to get us to a budget by June 30th, I don't think we have a lot of debate about the fiscal 26 budget. It's pretty close to locked in, I think.
I think based on the feedback we got today, we're good.
And the compensation study, I see Angie is still back there. She's obviously being penalized for something, but she tells me we're actually going to have output from that maybe at the second meeting in May. Prior to formally actually adopting a budget, we will know whether there are any things from that plan that could change. None of that is in now.
Yeah, we have placeholders in for that.
Oh, you have, there are built-ins about guesstimates?
Yeah. There's an estimate for salary increases based on this.
We go through salary increases every year, but are you making assumptions about where you think the compensation study will come out?
Yes.
And you're laying it out over a 5-year period, so it's not just built in
So-
26.
So that's why
Well,
fiscal
it's
year.
built into 26, and then it compounds from there based on
Yes.
our COLA and
That-
merit
that
assumptions,
is-
yes.
One of the reasons. So typically in a regular year, our personnel expenses are going to grow 5-ish% because you got COLA and you have merit increases. This year, it's probably going to be more like 10 or 11%.
And I mean, I will say, having been the treasurer of a private school and of a church, the one thing they have in common with the Village of Pinehurst is the compensation budget's around 55% of the total budget. And I don't believe you ever balance the budget through the compensation line. That has lots of adverse consequences to it. So what we're really talking about is the other 45% when we get down to brass tacks on that.
Yeah.
Or the revenue side of the equation.
Thinking about the expense side, yes,
Yeah.
but absolutely,
Yeah.
yes.
I mean, the problem is, yes, 55% of our budget grows at 5% to 10% every year, and our revenue grows at
One.
next to none.
Yeah.
Well, hold on about that. Revenue growth is next to nothing. Because regardless of, well, we don't know what it'll actually be, but we are projecting a steady increase, not dramatic, in both our property tax revenue and it's under intergovernmental revenues in your chart, Dana, but that's sales tax. And so they are steadily growing. I'm just looking at right now.
The property tax, that's a function of what we think will get built out in Pine Wild and other places. It's 75, is that our projected new building starts for next year?
I think we project 60 in each budget, don't we?
I think this year was 75, but
Okay.
I mean,
Yeah.
Well, that's good.
And that was on the
much?
land of 1%, I think, growth from those sources.
Yes.
But if you look at this chart, I mean, property tax revenue does not grow very much. Intergovernmental revenues is not growing very much. And none of these are growing hardly at all.
Right. I'm just, between 25 and 26, is that the number you're looking at now?
Well, even
Yeah.
24.
So our two main revenue sources, the property tax, that in this plan at least, grows, between 1% and 2% a year, in a year that we don't increase the tax rate. The intergovernmental revenues are growing at 1.7% per year. And that's on $13 million and, $10 million roughly.
I guess we won't know.
Salaries and benefits are growing at 5% on $17 million.
Clearly.
So there's a big imbalance there that
They
that
grow-
gap grows wide.
Definitely grow
Very-
at different rates.
Right.
I think it'll be interesting to see what ends up being the actual numbers for 25 as well as 26, because there are pieces of property that were vacant a year ago. Now, as I drive around, have lots of look like healthy tax-paying homes on them, and as well as people who are putting additions onto their homes, which increase a little bit of the revenue we get. But I don't.
It does, but that has steadily been happening for years and years and years.
When it's
And
against a
the
six-
average residential taxpayer in Pinehurst pays about $1,100 in taxes. So one home is not going to move the needle on the revenue side of the
On the
budget.
average.
Well, it's all on a base of $6 billion, so you're.
Correct.
You build even $1 million home, that doesn't move the needle very much.
No, if you build a few, though. Okay, that's good. That's good. It's a good thing to point out. The growth is much slower rate for both our property tax revenue and our sales tax revenue than is the growth of our comp and benefits for staff, and that's understandable. But
Yeah,
good to point out.
and in the past 5 years, we've had the sales tax that has
Yeah.
helped that problem a lot. But we don't expect it to be growing nearly at the rate it has over the past 5 years.
We'll have other discussions and try to figure out this idea of why there's not more tax revenue coming in from sales tax. I'm baffled, but different issue. Okay. So what else do you want to opine and discuss?
So I want you to tell me whether you're good with scenario A or C, is what I want.
Well,
I'm good with scenario A until we, because I think we need to keep the fire thing alive until we know what it is.
Well, I'm sorry, what do you mean by that, Barb?
Wait till the fire birdie comes to us and find out what it is we really need.
we've already had weekly reports from Doug that the preliminary data from the birdie was, I
So,
don't know what the word you used was, but it's not what we thought it was going to be.
So ultimately, I don't think that we'll build a full-fledged fire station, but I don't want to be premature in.
Right.
I think it's premature to do that. I mean, that's a decision that is, we have the responsibility for public safety. It's not something we can put on the back burner, so I think it should stay in the plan, at least as in the plan, let me put it that way. No, I agree. I think I would go with scenario A, the way you presented it. I'm still pondering removing water tanks, which is in the budget, and infrastructure improvements in village places, which is not in the budget. So you'll have to figure that out for me, what that really means.
I
think it's a good scenario. I think it's a good plan.
I have no problem with FY 26. We're on the cusp of, though I've already expressed my opinion on the tax rate, and when it comes time to adopt it, we'll have a discussion there. But on the out years, I don't see. I'm much more comfortable with, it wasn't my scenario, but scenario C, which I think is a more practical approach. I don't agree with these out years of promising a tax increase, but we're not voting for those. We're only voting for the year we're in on the tax rate. So if you're going to have those in there. Was it a year or two ago, we had a vote on a 1 cent reduction on the tax rate that I proposed. It lost 3-2, but of course I voted for the budget. Just because you don't get what you want, you just can't not vote for the budget. But I do think that the more we find out about the $10 million possible third fire facility versus the data we know about of how much fires we respond to versus the preliminary information on the birdie tells us a lot that we need to know about that. And that's sort of the huge elephant in the budget. I mean, that has dramatic impact going forward in perpetuity. This is not a one-time arrangement. It's much different from the library. We're talking about 2 or 3 FTEs, and
Yeah, you're talking 12 FTEs,
You're
which
talking-
is 3 to 4 cents on the tax
I
rate.
mean, you're talking real money, and so I'm skeptical of that. So I'm much closer to C. I'm probably going to study this a little and give you some other thoughts and have you run some numbers, because I know you can do that, and I appreciate the information about the comp study being built in, which to me is similar to building our budget without the fire facility in. But we don't have the final results yet, but we can still make preliminary decisions. So that's good to know about, and that's where I'm at the moment. Let me see if I don't think I have anything other to. No, well, we're waiting to find out, of course, about the library, and now I understand the pumper truck is evidently, it is not as necessary as I thought it might be. And I'm fine with Camelot Playground, for those who wondered. But unless other people don't really care for it. I mean, I don't use it much, but it's, I find it,
So
the rest of my nieces.
I got affirmative on scenario A from 2. Is that a consensus that Dana and I, mostly Dana, can build the budget off of that scenario A?
Yeah, I still don't like having the penny in fiscal 30, but for the budget, I think it's fine. And I would make my periodic request that we rename the operating margin, the operating ratio, because that's really what it is. But other than that, I will pass.
Yeah, on the idea there of dropping 0.5 cent, I mean, what that'll do is it adjusts just the projections. And I don't think you should stop at 0.5 cent. You can go to a full cent. You can go to 2 cents.
Well, we can run
What-
those if you want to,
Yeah,
but
well, my point is, it adjusts the projections. The real issue for taxes is how much are you spending?
yes.
Key, okay? So that's what the conversation needs to go to. I've got no problem accepting A because it's a projection. That's on there. But the conversation that we need to do for our taxpayers is how much are we spending? And it is concerning about our operating budget. Okay, what other things can we do to reduce that? And not sure there's going to be a lot, but I'd like to certainly entertain that as we're moving along here to be able to reduce the operating budget. Okay, but I'll go with A at this stage in the game, and recognize that's the current projections we're working with the understanding that we have to talk about spending.
And I think that's a very fair evaluation. Certainly, to reduce operating costs, 55% of it is personnel. So that's something you need to look at. But again, like with enterprise tonight, that's something we're always looking at, always trying to save a few dollars here and there. So that is something we'll continue to do, and we want to be as efficient as we can as well.
I'm fine with scenario A for 2026. I am not going down
To
the
be
road.
continued.
Yeah,
To
with
be
the
continued.
5-year, raising your taxes, and we're going to have hire 12 more people, and that's, well, we don't, we
No.
think we're not going to do that, but people are, we haven't made that decision. I haven't heard anybody else say, let's put that aside for the moment. What I'm hearing is, let's leave it in the projections.
Well, again, I go back to the point, if you want to take it off a cent, take it off, or 0.5 cent, just take it off a full cent. Again, it's projections. If that makes you feel better, your projections, that you can put it out there, but it's still going to change. It's going to change one way or another. What they're trying to get to here, and the staff, from my perspective, is some sort of accuracy as to what it is. You want to cut taxes? Cut spending. Stop playing with the number
Hey,
here.
I've already offered up some things there.
Likewise.
Okay, so,
But that's the focus, whether you're saying a cent now or not,
yes,
that may play well.
it's,
The point is, what are you doing to cut the spending?
I've outlined in my scenario a bunch of things to cut the spending.
And we all have. I think we're all on the same sheet of music here. What we're talking about is projections, and you're pushing for the half a cent. I'll push for a cent.
If you
It
com-
just changes
if
the
you cut-
projections.
If you cut enough spending, or you're a bit of a skinflint in the spending area, you won't have to worry as much about the projections on taxes, because you're not going to be needing all this extra money.
There's no question by reducing and being a skinflint, which I appreciate, and I will say that I think that the staff has done a pretty good job of that in lowering expenditures this year, okay, and by not having the assistant manager being filled and a couple other things, looking at the aspects for enterprise, saving some money there. I think we're seeing evidence of them trying to be good stewards of the taxpayer dollar, okay? And so I concur with that. I say let's continue to look for it and be good stewards of the taxpayer dollar, and we're working off projections. It's going to change.
Well, certainly I think will change before we adopt it, because there's too many projects involved in this projection now.
Okay.
On scenario A, that could have a serious impact on the future of the fiscal health of the village. When you're talking about $10 million for a facility and 12 FTEs, and you're laying it into your projections, that's a serious.
Do you think that's lost on anybody at this table?
I don't know that. No, I don't think it's lost.
I don't think it is.
I don't think it's lost. I just think that we sort of dance around whether or not we want to keep it in there or not keep it in there. I'm willing to wait because we're going to have more discussions on this.
So, are we? Because I think my feedback tonight is that we settled on scenario A, and that we're going to build the budget on scenario A that
Correct.
we have discussed. So, the next meeting, we will be coming to you with scenario A as the budget hearing, and then
Okay, is scenario A have in the fire facility?
yes.
Okay. Well, I don't think we have consensus on that, because some people want to hear more information, which is fair.
Yes. Scenario A is worst-case scenario, so it assumes that we are building the most expensive fire facility that
Ever
we could.
constructed in Moore County.
Constructed in Moore County, yes.
No,
And it's a placeholder. It's not a commitment to do it.
Yes.
Right, it's a placeholder.
It's a
That's right.
placeholder.
right.
So by fiscal year 30, it will not be 24.5 cents. That is one thing I can guarantee. Everything will be totally different. But what we need to do is have a budget that we're comfortable with. Everyone seems comfortable with 26. 27 through 30 is going to change.
Right.
We're just saying that right now we're presenting the most expensive, and
But one of the things that, and John Taylor's mentioned this before, is that some of these capital projects take on lives of their own, that they just seem to be like, who is it, Dorian Gray's Portrait, where the guy gets reversed, he keeps getting younger? Remember that movie? And so this budget thing, it's Dorian Gray, is getting more attractive over the year because we leave it there.
yeah.
To Jeff's point, we owe it to the people who elected us to take a serious look at our capital budget, and we owe it to them to take a serious look at our operating budget. And that's where the rubber's going to meet the road. We know what's baked in. There's no different than the federal budget. You don't want to touch Medicare, Medicaid, and Social Security. You haven't got a whole lot left. Well, we know where the 45% is. What we can do about that, that's where the conversation's going to be. I'm ready to move
So-
to go to closed session, if
I'm ready to go
if
to
Doug
closed
is
session,
content
and
and
I-
Dana's
I-
content.
So I don't know that I am. Are we building the scenario A, or do you want to discuss about this more?
Yes.
I build a scenario.
Yes. Okay.
I'm gonna provide some other suggestions to Dana based on all that we've heard here, because I put some things in there that I now know not necessary, but until we resolve these big enchiladas that are looking us in the face, okay, and just say they're a plug, all right?
That's only going to change whether or not it's a placeholder.
Yeah, I
And
understand.
that only changes maybe where the placeholder is in the process, or whether it's
You know, some
Yeah.
people take the placeholder.
In 2026.
No, I'm not trying to tamper with the 2026 line, other than I think that the tax rate should come down.
And the only thing that will change the placeholder is if we collectively vote to knock something off. Or do it, and actually put a real number in that's no longer a placeholder.
So-
Placeholders can be interpreted as aspirational objectives of a governing body. And that's why we've got to take those seriously with those big budget items.
Yep, so I mean, I think we have coalesced around A. So we're going to build the budget around A. If anyone wants to throw us another scenario just to see what it looks like, we can show you what it would look like.
That'd be great. And I still think C is not a bad one.
We already said A, so I'm not going to reopen that can. So-
Fine, that's fine.
Fail, that's when you close,
That's fine.
walk away.
Okay,
All right, so we now will move to a closed session. If I get a motion.
I move to recess the work session and enter the closed session pursuant to NCGS 143-318.11A5 to establish or instruct the public body staff or negotiating agents concerning the position to be taken by or on behalf of the public body in negotiating, 1, the price and other material terms of a contract or proposed contract for the acquisition of real property by purchase, option, exchange, or lease, or 2, the amount of compensation and other material terms of an employment contract or proposed employment contract.
Second.
A motion and a second. All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Okay, we are going to a closed session as soon as the room is empty. Take 2 minutes.